What if everything we rely on, Europe's economy, energy supply and stability, was on the brink of collapse? What if Vladimir Putin's grim prediction that Europe's economy will collapse by 2025 became reality? With a critical supply line that could soon be severed, Europe's economy faces a catastrophe of unprecedented scale. Rising energy costs, inflation, and fractured leadership could push Europe to the edge. Could this mark the end of the EU as we know it? Vladimir Putin has sounded the alarm. At his recent meeting with Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, the Russian president reaffirmed his willingness to continue supplying gas to the West, including Slovakia. However, there's a catch. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has vowed to block any extension of the gas transit agreement, effectively threatening the pipeline that supplies much of Europe. Putin did not mince words, warning of dramatic consequences. While he assured Fico that Russia is ready to continue supplying gas to the West, he also added that, after January 1, 2025, Kyiv's unyielding stance could make this virtually impossible. Following the meeting, Slovak Prime Minister Fico expressed deep frustration. Zelensky's position, he argued, not only inflicts financial damage on Slovakia, but also jeopardizes electricity production in its nuclear power plants. An unacceptable situation for the country. For Slovakia, this isn't just a diplomatic issue, it's a matter of survival. As the January 2025 deadline approaches, the consequences for Europe are becoming increasingly apparent. Germany, the EU's economic powerhouse, is particularly vulnerable. Since the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, Germany has struggled to diversify its energy sources, leaving it heavily reliant on expensive LNG imports. Rising energy prices have already slowed industrial production, and the IMF predicts near-zero GDP growth for Germany in 2025. The situation across the EU looks similarly bleak. Countries like Italy and Austria, which are heavily dependent on Russian gas, are bracing for higher costs that threaten to cripple their manufacturing sectors. Energy prices for households have skyrocketed, fueling public discontent and social unrest. This is more than an economic crisis. It's a geopolitical nightmare. The EU's increasing reliance on LNG imports from the US has driven up costs and made member states more vulnerable to global market fluctuations. As tensions between Russia and Ukraine escalate, Europe finds itself in a self-imposed chokehold. Putin's grim forecast casts a long shadow. The economy, particularly Germany's, is on an unsustainable path. If no solution is found, the continent could face an economic collapse that would reshape the global balance of power. Germany's leadership is deeply divided on how to handle this crisis. At the center of the storm is Alice Weidel from the AfD, who has emerged as a prominent voice demanding immediate change. The reckless sanctions against Russia and the hasty energy transition have ruined the German economy. Energy costs are soaring, and our industry is suffering. This is not sustainability, it's self-destruction, she declared, calling for the resumption of dialogue with Russia to secure affordable energy, a stance that has sparked both support and outrage. Weidel faces opposition from Friedrich Merz of the CDU, who sees dependence on Russian gas as a geopolitical risk Germany cannot afford. Russia's use of energy as a weapon is a clear signal that Germany must accelerate its transition to renewable energy and diversify its imports, Merz argued, dismissing the AfD's proposals as short-sighted populism. Meanwhile, Chancellor Olaf Scholz struggles to balance solidarity with Ukraine and the growing frustration of German citizens facing rising energy costs. Scholz defended his stance, stating, "Energy independence from Russia is not just an economic necessity, but a moral obligation. Germany will not allow itself to be blackmailed by Moscow." Public opinion, however, tells a different story. Support for the AfD is rising, particularly in regions hardest hit by the energy crisis. The divide among Germany's leaders reflects a broader question: can the country and Europe weather this crisis unscathed? This is not just Germany's problem. Across Europe, the expiration of the gas transit agreement could destabilize economies, spark political upheaval, and test the very foundations of the EU. Countries like Italy and Austria are preparing for soaring energy costs that could paralyze manufacturing and disrupt daily life. Smaller nations like Slovakia and Hungary face their own crises, with energy security hanging by a thread. The question is not just whether Europe can stabilize its energy markets, but whether it can restore public trust in its institutions. If the EU fails to overcome these challenges, the consequences could be catastrophic. Could this crisis mark the beginning of a fragmented Europe, where national interests outweigh unity? The answer may depend on whether Europe can strike a balance between immediate energy needs and long-term sustainability. Failure could trigger a chain reaction of economic instability, social unrest, and political reorganization across the continent. The urgency grows as 2025 looms closer. Vladimir Putin's prediction of an economic collapse is not just a rhetorical threat. It reflects the precarious state of the continent. Inflation is eroding purchasing power, energy insecurity is disrupting industry, and political polarization is dividing nations. Germany, the linchpin of the EU, is under immense pressure to act decisively. But can it overcome its fractured leadership and the waning trust of its citizens? The broader EU faces equally daunting challenges. If Germany, its largest economy, falters, the repercussions could destabilize the entire bloc. Yet there is a glimmer of hope. The EU has weathered past crises from the 2008 financial collapse to Brexit. However, this time the stakes are higher, and the solutions harder to find. The decisions made in the coming months will determine whether Europe emerges stronger from this crisis or collapses under the weight of its contradictions. The clock is ticking, and the choices made now will shape the future of an entire continent. What if everything Europe depends on, its economy, energy supply, and stability, were on the verge of collapse? What if Vladimir Putin's chilling prediction of a European economic breakdown by 2025 became reality? With vital supply chains teetering on disruption, Europe is staring at a crisis of unprecedented proportions. Soaring energy costs, surging inflation, and fractured leadership could push the continent toward a catastrophe. Are we witnessing the beginning of the end of the EU as we know it? Vladimir Putin's warnings carry ominous weight. During his meeting with Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, the Russian president reiterated Russia's readiness to continue supplying gas to Europe, including Slovakia. But there's a twist. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has vowed to block any extension of the gas transit agreement, effectively threatening the lifeline that supplies a significant portion of Europe. Putin was unequivocal in his remarks. Kyiv's obstinacy, he said, could render Russian gas deliveries practically impossible after January 1, 2025. Slovakia, heavily reliant on Russian gas for energy and its nuclear power plants, finds itself caught in the crossfire. Prime Minister Fico voiced his frustration, stating that Zelensky's stance not only poses financial risks for Slovakia, but also jeopardizes its energy infrastructure. This is not just about diplomacy, Fico declared, it's about survival. Slovakia's plight echoes a broader European dilemma. As the January 2025 deadline looms, the impact on the continent's energy landscape is becoming impossible to ignore. Germany, the economic backbone of the EU, is especially vulnerable, struggling to replace Russian gas since the Ukraine conflict began. Germany has become heavily dependent on costly LNG imports. This dependency has driven energy prices sky high, crippling industrial output and slowing economic growth. The IMF projects near-zero GDP growth for Germany in 2025, and the ramifications ripple across Europe. Italy and Austria, also reliant on Russian gas, are bracing for exorbitant energy costs that could paralyze their manufacturing sectors. Household energy bills across the EU have skyrocketed, sparking public anger, protests, and social unrest. This is not merely an economic crisis, it is a geopolitical quagmire. The EU's growing reliance on expensive LNG imports, particularly from the United States, has exacerbated financial strain and left member states vulnerable to market volatility. As tensions between Russia and Ukraine escalate, Europe finds itself ensnared in a self-made energy dilemma. Putin's dire forecast casts a shadow over the continent. Its economic trajectory is unsustainable. If solutions are not found soon, Europe risks an economic collapse that could reshape the global order. In Germany, the heart of the EU, political leaders are deeply divided. Alice Weidel of the AfD has gained prominence as a vocal critic of the government's energy policies. The reckless sanctions against Russia, and the rushed transition to renewable energy have destroyed Germany's economy, she asserted. Energy costs are skyrocketing, and our industries are suffering. This isn't sustainability. It's self-destruction. Weidel advocates resuming dialogue with Russia to secure affordable energy, a controversial stance that has garnered both support and criticism. Her calls for change clash with Friedrich Merz of the CDU, who views dependence on Russian gas as a geopolitical gamble Germany cannot afford. Russia has weaponized energy, Merz argued. This is a clear signal that we must accelerate our transition to renewables and diversify energy imports. He dismissed Weidel's proposals as short-term populism, urging Germany to focus on long-term sustainability. Meanwhile, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is struggling to strike a balance between supporting Ukraine and addressing the mounting frustrations of German citizens over rising energy prices. Energy independence from Russia is not just an economic necessity, Scholz stated. It is a moral imperative. Germany will not allow itself to be blackmailed by Moscow. Despite these reassurances, public discontent is growing. Support for the AfD is rising, particularly in regions hardest hit by the energy crisis. The political divide in Germany mirrors a larger European question. Can the EU survive this crisis intact? The expiration of the gas transit agreement threatens to destabilize economies across the continent. Italy and Austria are bracing for soaring energy prices that could disrupt production and everyday life. Smaller nations like Hungary and Slovakia are grappling with their own energy insecurities. For the EU, the stakes are existential. Failure to stabilize energy markets could shatter public trust in its institutions and fracture the Union. The implications are staggering. Could this crisis signal the fragmentation of Europe, with national interests overtaking the collective good? Much depends on whether Europe can balance its immediate energy needs with long-term sustainability. A failure to do so could trigger a domino effect of economic instability, social unrest, and political realignments. The specter of a fractured EU looms larger with each passing day. As 2025 draws closer, the urgency grows. Putin's prediction of a European economic collapse is not just a rhetorical threat, it reflects a precarious reality. Inflation is eroding purchasing power, energy insecurity is crippling industries, and political divisions are deepening. Germany, as the cornerstone of the EU, faces immense pressure to act decisively, but can it overcome its internal divisions and rebuild public trust? The broader EU is no less challenged. If Germany, its economic powerhouse, stumbles, the repercussions will reverberate across the bloc. Yet history offers a glimmer of hope. The EU has weathered crises before, from the 2008 financial meltdown to Brexit. However, this time the stakes are higher, and the solutions are more elusive. Decisions made in the coming months will shape not just Europe's economic future, but its geopolitical identity. The clock is ticking, and the choices ahead will determine whether Europe emerges stronger or succumbs to the weight of its contradictions.